Hello everybody. My name is Teresa Bowers and this is Webinar Wednesday. Thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, there are just a few things to mention. To view the presentation, you must follow the link provided in the webinar confirmation email from Datamine Software. Dial-in information is also included within that same email. We have muted the phone lines to prevent background noise. If you have a question, please type it into the chat box on your screen. We've allocated time after the formal presentation for our presenters to answer your questions. Joining us today from Datamine Sudbury office is Mr. David Kerr. Dave is the Global Solutions Manager for our Geological Database Management System, Fusion, and has been with the company for a little over 2 years now. Today he will be showing us an overview of our new Fusion8 software, which is set to be released in May. The floor is yours, Dave.
Great. Thank you very much, Teresa. Okay. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to sit with us and let us show you what we've been working on here at Datamine. I can tell by some of the names that I see that we've got a lot of people here that are existing users of the Fusion suite. So welcome. Great to see you. Great to see that you're interested in the future of our products and what we've done and where we're going. This is Fusion8 represents quite a bit of work on our side. This is something that we've been working on for probably just short of a year at this point. We've got a lot of new features in here, a lot of significant changes to the software. So what I'm going to do here today, I'm really going to try to kind of stick with our 45 time limit here. And so to do that, I'm going to focus mostly on some of the new stuff and the new features and some of the big changes that we've made. But as you can imagine, with a version like this and the amount of work that we've put into it, there's a lot of changes that have been made. For example, bug fixes. We're probably into the 400 or 500 little bugs that have been addressed in this version. So we're not going to talk about those. Everything will be available within the release notes. So I'm going to show a little bit of slides just to kind of help through some of the concepts, but I'm going to spend most of my time within the product itself so that you can see it, see what it looks like, see how some of the new things behave. So one of the things to just kind of start off talking about is Fusion8 represents a major increment in the Fusion versioning, right? So we've gone from Fusion 2007, 2008 to 6 and 6.6 to Fusion 7, and then this is now Fusion 8. So with these major version increments, the service pack sequencing also resets. So this is a new base installation, and with that brings some opportunities on our side to clean up the installation a little bit and make sure all the new modules are part of that. And so what that means to you, we've got a new version of License Manager that will be installed with Fusion8. We've got new options in the product or the module selection, so Core Shed Management being one of them. This is one of our new products that we haven't talked too much about, but it's being fully released and fully available with Fusion8 and will be an option during the install. We've had some discussion so far about Report Manager and the newest iteration of that product. So the version that comes with Fusion8 is now the new and improved Report Manager, which we'll talk a little bit about here today. Great. So one of the changes that we have made with the Fusion products is we've shifted a little bit how the licensing works. And what we've done is a little bit of a consolidation. And I'm not going to spend too much time. I'll kind of leave it to you to maybe chat with your regional representatives. But essentially, now by using these single product licenses, they're going to enable multiple modules. So for example, off of a DH Logger license, now one DH Logger license will run Fusion Client, Query Builder, Crystal Viewer, these kinds of things. So you're no longer going to need individual licenses for some of these supporting modules. Instead, it's going to be a bit more streamlined as far as just having individual licenses kind of for each product. There may be a lot of questions about that. I'm going to leave it there, though, and really I encourage you that if you do have some questions to contact your account managers, and they'll walk you through some of the changes that we've made there. One of the big features that we've done here with Fusion8 is added what we've called context-sensitive reference tables. So really what this lets you do is build relationships and build a bit of a hierarchy into the pick list. So in the past, there was never really this idea that one pick list was related to another, that the content could be filtered based on, the selection in another pick list. So now we've implemented this into Fusion. So now you've got complete control over how these kind of subsets get filtered out. So what I've got shown on the screen is a really kind of basic example, maybe something that resonates with us, as far as kind of the rock type, classifications and categories, and ultimately the rock types. So what we can do now is build this kind of relationship into the pick list at the column level, and it's going to help drive the user, first of all, because it's going to refine the options that they can choose from, but it's also going to help us as administrators of the system to really kind of make sure that the correct options are being selected. It's a way of enforcing a bit of this governance, as well as streamlining that workflow a little bit. We'll step through what the configuration of this looks like, because we've had to honor business unit configurations and stuff like that, and then we'll look at what this looks like in the software and how it behaves. One of the other things that we've added, we've really kind of focused on one of these themes of workflow and user experience, and how can we streamline these things, right? How can we get a user to the windows that they need with the fewest amount of clicks? And so one of the things that we've introduced is this startup module. So now every single product, DHLogger, Sample Station, Fusion Administrator, Fusion Client, when you first launch these products, you're going to get presented with a tile view. So it's going to show you kind of all the main modules of that product, and then you can single-click launch into that module. So right away, if you have a user that is always performing lab imports, well, in the previous version, they would have to open DHLogger, close the main drill hole window, open the lab import window. 3 or 4 clicks later, they're in the appropriate screen. Well, now they can just click right into the lab import module. And further to that, we allow users at a local level to specify a default module. So going back to this example of a user that only does lab imports, they can set that their default module is lab import. So every time they open DHLogger, it's just going to go straight to that module. So we've really tried to, who are the different users of the system, what are their navigations throughout the different screens, and how can we streamline it? So this is a good starting point. Following on the kind of user experience theme, one of the things that we've done here is really highlighted to the end user when there's something special about a field or a column. So required fields are now highlighted bold red. Calculated fields, the headers as well as the text is blue text. So it's going to be really obvious that there's something unique about these columns. Our new context-sensitive column types, these are now green. And then the not editable, so an example of this is your sample results. These are just going to be gray. So it's going to be very clear to the user what fields they absolutely need to input data into, what fields have special behavior, for example, the context sensitive, and then what fields they can't touch. It's calculated or it's only populated through a lab import. And following, again, with the user experience theme, is we've changed how the validations occur when you're adding depth data, interval data. So in previous versions, you would enter a depth from and a depth to, and if there was ever any, if there was an invalid interval or if there was ever any kind of conflicts with other intervals, you were getting validations pretty much as that data was being entered. And there were certain examples where there may be a valid change that you had to make to an interval, but you had to step through, all these validation messages, and maybe you had to do a specific sequence of how you changed the intervals, and maybe it also included changing intervals, before and after the one you're trying to edit. And so what we've done is we've changed when the validation happens. So now you're only going to get validated when you try to save this data, so not as you're entering it. But then to make sure the user's aware that they're potentially entering data that's incorrect, we're going to highlight it red to you. So if you try to enter an interval that's not right, instead of throwing up a validation message right away, it's just going to get highlighted red in your face. There's something wrong with this data. And then as you try to save it, it's not going to let it happen until you go back and make all those red errors turn black again. And one of the other changes we've made within DHLogger, we've had some people mention to us, look, when I've got a lot of different tabs showing on DHLogger, and I get these small little navigation arrows left and right to kind of scroll through the different tabs, it's not the most efficient way to get to maybe that last tab. And so what we've done is added a local preference, a display preference, where you can have the tabs do a bit of a spill onto multiple lines. And so what we can see now is that all the tabs that are available to my logging style will appear on the one screen. So we can click through now onto the tabs that we want to see. So what I'm going to do now is jump into the software, and I'm going to start with our cascading or context-sensitive reference tables. So let me just get into my virtual machine here. I've got a VM configured with Windows 8.1 running on it, and it's a 64-bit as well. So, a bit of a side note that we typically test the software on latest, hardware, latest software. So we're in our GDMS portal here, and I'm going to launch into Fusion Administrator. So I'm going to show you how we've enabled the configuration of these context-sensitive reference tables, and how you'll be able to make use of them even in these multi-site installations. So first thing we're seeing in Fusion Administrator, the startup tiles, right? So now we can one-click launch into some of these common modules. So where I want to work right now is in the custom tables, and I've created a new custom table. I'm just calling it context for sake of example, and I've got a column down here that when I open up the column properties, we've got a new option here that's now called context sensitive. Okay, so at the column level for every single table, you can flag a column as context sensitive. And now when we try to configure this screen, what we're going to see is kind of lists of codes broken out by business unit. And so we really had to go down to that level of granularity, because we can have one table, one column shared by multiple sites, multiple projects. So there was no way that you could do really a single configuration, because every business unit's going to see a different, or could potentially see a different subset of reference codes. And so we've done the configuration by business unit. So the way that it works is you will come in and decide which business unit you want to configure this relationship for. And for that business unit, then you can add a context. And what that means is that, so for this, I've called it cat, but this is a category column. The context provider is the classification. So the data in the classification column is going to drive the options they can pick from in the category column. So when you add this context, the system's just going to populate for you. This business unit has the possibility of choosing from these three values. And then what you do from here is build the relationship. So it says in the classification column, if they chose igneous, then the options they can choose from in the category are extrusive and intrusive. Similarly, going down for the different options, right? So you can really build this relationship one column at a time, and then you can have multiple columns related to each other. So there's really no limit to kind of how deep you can go with this. And I'll show you what this now looks like within the software. So I've closed Fusion Administrator. Now I'm going to launch into DHLogger. Again, I'm presented with my module selection window. I don't have any default setup, so every time I open DHLogger, I'm going to come to this screen. But I want to now launch into the drill hole window. So this is the main, entering caller information, details, samples. So I'm going to go into the Details tab. I've got my multi-line tabs configured for this database, right? So I can see all the tabs that my login style has access to. So in my new Context tab, I've now got a couple of columns that are highlighted green. Okay, well, what does that mean? So if I was to add a row here, first of all, I've got one column here called No Context. So this is a column that's tied to a custom rock type table, and I've got all kinds of options in here. This is basically the entire reference table that I could choose from. But what I want to see is I want to drive the user to have to choose a classification, a category, and a type. And so when I see these green columns, if you kind of mouse over, I can't pick anything at this point because I have no context. And if you hover over, it's going to tell you. It's going to say you need a value for the classification column first. And if I look in the type column, it needs a value in the category. So you can see there's kind of a multi-level hierarchy here. So if I come in now and choose a classification, it now gives me a refined list that I can choose from as far as the category goes. So if I now populate a certain category, now this rock type list that started out with 10 plus options, I only have 2 options. So I've really been able to refine this down to only applicable options to the user. Okay, so this is one example of how you can do this. Another example that I've set up is right on our drill hole or right on the caller screen. So I've got a column here called target that I can't choose a value from, and if I hover over, there's a relationship built in here to the region. So I would have to come in here first and pick a region, which then gives me certain options. And as I change the region, I have a different list of options. Okay, so you can do this on any of these tables, whether they're custom tables or whether they're built-in tables, right? So you can add these now to all of the different tables, and you can really now drive the user to have a more refined list and an improved experience. So the other thing that we can kind of see on this screen too are the different labels. So the highlighted red, whole numbers required, whole types required. I've got a calculated final depth column. If I get into my samples tab, similarly, right, I've got a required sample number, required from and to, a calculated depth, and then my actual result columns. These are just not editable. I can only populate these on a lab import. These context-sensitive relationships, these are also carried over into the import module. So if somebody's importing data from a CSV file or a text file, the system is going to validate that the options they're trying to import are actually honoring the relationships that you've defined. Now, we have also added an option where you can kind of turn that off, because at the end of the day, they're trying to import data that is a valid code. It exists in that reference table, and it's up to you whether or not you actually want to enforce the relationship. But by default, it will, and it'll actually stop the user and say, you're trying to enter a rock type value that doesn't meet, the classification that you've specified. So that relationship gets honored at that level. So going back to the startup module, we've kind of chosen a small subset of just what are the most important modules kind of as we see it. We're going to extend this in future versions to let you choose what module you want to see, the location, kind of the layout of the tabs. But as a first pass, these are kind of the most commonly used modules. And the export module has a bit of a special behavior in that you can actually choose right from this point which export you want to use. So you can have a list of the built-in exports, and any custom exports that you may have specified using a Fusion Connect's workspace would also appear in this pick list. And from here, in the user preferences, the default modules is where a user can specify for DHLogger what's the module that you want it to launch into, the drill hole module. For sample station, maybe I always work in the sample tags. I'm always printing tags. In Fusion Administrator, another list of options, and for Fusion Client, just bring me straight to the check-in window. And if you were to choose one of the export windows here, you could also specify a default export. So you could have a user that just always opens DHLogger, and it just immediately brings them to the export, the data mine export window. So, however, whatever the scenarios and the use cases are of your different users, they'll be able to really kind of refine their workflow. We've made changes as well to our icons. So our main taskbars up at the top in all of the products, everything's now been streamlined into a nice kind of white on dark background look and feel. Whereas in the previous version, we had some colored icons. There wasn't a whole lot of kind of consistency between them. So we've really just streamlined things into a nice look and feel, and changed a bit of the color scheme just to make things look a little nicer, flow a little bit smoother. So where I'll go next, and kind of following this this theme of, sorry, I opened the wrong module. Following this theme of the user experience and the user's workflow. For some that are already familiar, we have added our filter toolbar, right? This is a toolbar that's starting to appear on more and more screens, and we've added it to a couple of more in Fusion8. And the filter toolbar is where whenever you've got a list of data, and whenever this list can be a large list, whether it's a list of drill holes to check in, check out, a list of samples to add to a sample dispatch, this filter toolbar lets you filter out what you're looking at, right? So you want to look for a specific project or based on some sort of date range, and you can save those filters to be automatically applied the next time you open the window. So instead of sitting here and waiting for 100,000 drill holes to open up in an extreme scenario, you can specify a filter, save that filter. Every time you open the window, it just loads up this kind of filtered subset. Now that's not new, but what we have done, and we're kind of continuously evolving in this particular area, is we've made it so that any labels that have been configured, and more specifically any labels by business unit that have been configured. So if you may or may not know, you can do column labels by business unit. So if you have some business units working in one language, you could have Spanish labels and French labels and Russian labels, for example, all off of the same table, the same columns. And so now we've extended those labels into the filter toolbar. So it's a way of really, first of all, localizing that user experience. So an end user working in a particular site, in a particular country, using a particular operating language, DHLogger tables and columns are going to have their language, and now the filter toolbar options are going to have their language as well. So it's really just extending these notions of, centralized control in a distributed way, and then also localizing the experience. And we'll likely evolve this filter toolbar option even further to kind of refine what you can actually see in here. Sometimes there may just be too many columns to choose from, so we're gonna now go into refining it a bit more, making it just that much more efficient to apply filters and that sort of thing. Okay, where I'll go next Now, we've already done I've already done a webinar that's specifically focused on Report Manager. So I'm not going to spend too much time, but I do want to just open it. So if there's anybody here that didn't make it for the Report Manager webinar, you'll at least get a bit of a taste. But by all means, if you're interested in more details and exactly what you can do with the new iteration of Report Manager, I'd suggest that you go to our website, and the recorded webinar is available there as a link. So you just go in, click on the link, and you'll be able to watch it whenever you want. But the new Report Manager is a complete departure from the old version, and it's providing you complete control over every part of a chart. So, for example, if I want to run a standard control chart, you can choose the data, the parameters that you want to appear on this chart, and now we've extended that filter toolbar into Report Manager. So now you can choose from the columns that you want to filter on, and the list of operators. So this is the, do you want to focus on a specific project, a few projects, you want to exclude some projects, you want to do a date range, that sort of thing. You can do this now a field at a time. So the old version was a bit restrictive in how you could filter, but now you've got way more flexibility. But the real power and the real control within this new Report Manager are just the options you've got. So any text that appears, titles, subtitles, formats, it's all configurable, different fonts, colors, sizes. The various series that appear, the points within certain standard deviations, all the lines themselves, you control exactly how they appear. How do you want to scale the different axes, and what kind of background colors do you want to use, right? So you can control exactly how these things look, and then you're ultimately working towards a nice streamlined output of these charts that then can feed into a report. We've changed our activity module in that it's really just a filter. So what that means is that you can use the same chart template, so you can define one standard control chart template, but then you can have activities to kind of slice that data in different ways. So you want to do it for a particular lab or a set of labs, you want to do it based on projects, you want to do it based on a year-to-date. You could even filter it right down to a specific user that's importing lab certificates, all using the same chart templates. And then feeding into reports, so you have the ability to build a report, and using a really kind of intuitive, easy to use, drag and drop kind of interface, you define the content of this chart, this report. So in this case, I've got a couple of text objects, just free-form text that I'm formatting a certain way. I've got a title, a couple of introductory paragraphs here with some static text again. But then after that text, I've got my chart object. I could drag in one or more of these activities. And then you can drag the order of these things, how you want them to appear in the report. And then when you want to run this, it's going to give us, a default file name of the report name and the date timestamp. Let's go ahead and run this and just give you a really, really quick example of some of the stuff that you can do. So here's my final output of a report with my static text. My charts have been output based on how I've configured all the visual properties. They're in the order that I appeared. For the few charts that I specified to also include a summary and the data, these are here as well. Okay, so here's, again, this is just a quick example, and I'll suggest that you look up our webinar if you want some more information on exactly how the new module works and some of the controls that you've got. So as I was kind of mentioning at the beginning, a new base installation, this version of Report Manager is the version that now comes with Fusion8. So the previous version is no longer included in the installation of Windows 8. Okay, I'm going to jump back to my slides really quickly here, because the next thing I'm going to talk about is, and I kind of saved this for near the end, is a significant change that we've made to the underlying architecture of the software. For those that I've maybe talked to a little bit over the past couple of months, I maybe give you a bit of a hint. But what we've done here is we've really changed dramatically the way that we move data. Okay, so this is how we synchronize databases. So synchronizing remote databases and synchronizing local databases. That was one part of it, and then the other part of it is actually moving data. So check in, check out operations, how these work, and especially how these work over, high latency, low bandwidth environments, the kind of networks that we tend to see in our industry, right? Remote operations, remote fields, sometimes just don't have the best networks to work with. So what we've done, what we can see here on the screen is the way that we used to do it. Okay, so we had an API that we called Data Move, and the way that this worked and the way that Fusion Client worked is there really was a lot of interactions back and forth between the two databases. So if you're synchronizing a local database with a central database, between Fusion Client querying both databases to kind of figure out the state of the data, and then making a call to this Data Move component, things weren't done very efficiently. There was a lot of back and forth. There was multiple connections to the database happening. And really the basic operations of this Data Move component was that it transferred only one table at a time. Okay, so you can imagine now, if you start compounding this, for one drill hole, you may have 10 tables, and for 100 drill holes, this number starts growing up. So if you are talking about one table at a time, and on each of those tables it's a different transaction, well, in a LAN environment, you might not notice a big deal or a big difference, but kind of as the quality of the network degrades, these things just start exponentially getting slower and slower and slower. So some of you out there may be very familiar with the experience of opening Fusion Client and waiting 10, 20, 30 minutes just for a synchronization to change, and then to perform a check-in or a check-out, maybe you're there for another 10, 20, 30, or on extreme cases where you're doing an entire drilling project, you might be there for a couple of hours. So we needed to do something very drastically here, and we're really happy with what we've come up with, and we're really pleased to kind of offer this now. We're confident in the solution that we've come up with, and we're confident that we're going to kind of hammer this problem once and for all. And I'm not going to get into too much technical detail. If people out there want to know more of the gory technical details, by all means we can have that discussion. But we've done two things to solve this problem. So the one thing to kind of keep in your head is the old way that we did this data transferring. It was very chatty, lots of transactions back and forth, and it was one table at a time. Okay, so what we did is we completely rewrote that API. That what was Data Move is now called Data Sync. Okay, now what happens here is we've really minimized the amount of SQL transactions that Fusion Client has to do against the central. Okay, so it still needs to do some queries as far as what's in the central, kind of what's the state of the data in the two, but we've really reduced things and pushed as much as we can into this new component. And so the interaction between Fusion Client now is basically based on an operation. So Fusion Client is now going to say, check in this drill hole. And that action is going to get performed as a single transaction. So every drill hole and all of the data for that drill hole now gets moved one drill hole at a time. Not one table at a time, but one drill hole at a time. And so what we've been able to do by doing that is really kind of enforcing a consistent state of the data between the two databases. So in case there was any kind of hiccups or somebody killed Fusion Client as it was transferring this, we can roll back an entire drill hole instead of just rolling back a table at a time type of thing. And so we've been able to kind of package as many of these transactions between the databases into one single package that then really minimizes the amount of traffic that's going back and forth and the amount of database calls that are going back and forth. Okay, so this is the first thing that we did, right? So this in its own, and maybe I should mention here as well, part of this exercise, what we did is we also took a really close look at the local database and the indexes that are on that databases, and some of the underlying triggers and the things that are happening behind the scenes. And we've kind of gotten rid of a lot of redundant things, and we'll only run certain triggers when we have to. Basically, what it all means to you is that the performance of performing a check-in and a check-out have significantly improved. We're still working through some real-world test cases and real-world scenarios right now. So I'm going to hold back on kind of presenting, the numbers and the amount of increase that you can expect. But we'll have this in the upcoming weeks, and by all means, we're all confident here that the first time you open up this and you do a checkout or a check-in, you're going to see a big difference. So this data sync component, this was the first part. Okay, so let's fundamentally change how we move data. And then the next part was to identify, okay, for these scenarios where we have a really bad network connection between the client computer and the server, what can we do about that, right? So how can we kind of hit that scenario specifically? And so what we've done is we've added an optional web service now. Okay, so, and I'll kind of emphasize the word optional because you don't need to use it if you don't want to. But what you can do now is you can add this new server layer. It's essentially a web server. Okay, so we'll now install an application, or it's a website kind of. A web service will install on a web server in your infrastructure. And then when this is in place, what happens is the client computer, when it now wants to perform a transaction, so when it wants to check in a drill hole, it won't have any interaction with the central, except for a little bit of querying that Fusion Client does. But really what happens now is when this web service is present, what happens is this new data sync component, it wraps up all the data for a drill hole into an XML file. And an XML format is really, it's a really kind of good format for transferring across networks. This is kind of an industry standard technical format. So it'll wrap up a drill hole and all of the associated data into an XML file and just send it to the web service. And then what happens is now you just have two servers that are interacting with each other. Okay, so you'll have this web service running on a server, and it's going to have a nice fast connection to the database server. So you can imagine an operation now that says, check in drill hole 001. We just send the data off to the web server. Okay, and then now the web server is going to handle all the work. So it's going to be connecting to the database and actually performing all the updates and transfers against the database, and then it's just going to send back a success code to the client. So by using this kind of layer and really kind of taking advantage of the server-side processing, we've really been able to handle that scenario of working off of low bandwidth, high latency networks. So kind of using different combinations of these packages between no web service and a web service. I mean, we've seen performance on some client databases, potentially some of yours out there that we've been just testing with, and we've seen operations go from, say, 20 minutes in one example down to 2 minutes. Or in some extreme cases, we're seeing things that used to take, multiple hours down to 10 or 20 minutes. When you're working in a LAN environment, so if you're in your corporate network already and you are in a LAN scenario, you're still going to see an improvement. But if you are working off of a high latency environment, it's a significant improvement. I mean, exponentially better. So this is really something that we're quite proud of here. We've really had a lot of fun kind of implementing this. It's all using kind of the latest technologies as far as .NET components and the web service itself, and how things are interacting with the database. It's all kind of fully optimized now. So that is giving kind of a pretty high-level view. I know hopefully I didn't get too technical, but really what to take away from this is that it's been a fundamental change kind of under the hood of how we move data and how we interact with the database server. And I should also mention that Fusion8 doesn't represent kind of the final solution. We're probably about 80% there. So what's released with Fusion8 handles all the synchronizations, and it handles check-in and check-outs of drill holes, but drill holes only at this point. When Fusion8 goes out, we're then going to get on to finalizing the other modules and then implementing this same kind of schema into Fusion Scheduler. And what this really does for us is it really starts opening up new opportunities and new scenarios. So with the way that things are structured now, it wouldn't take us very much to add the check-in operation to the different products. So for example, imagine being in DHLogger working on a drill hole and perform a check-in right there, not having to open up Fusion Client, synchronize, and then find your drill hole in the list, and 10 clicks later you've checked in your drill hole. Well, with this new architecture, it starts enabling these new possibilities, these new scenarios. So this is what we're going to start thinking about now. We got the architecture in place. We'll get it certified. We'll get everybody comfortable and confident with it, and then now we're going to look at how we can leverage it in new and unique ways. One of the other things it does for us on the engineering side, from the development side, is it's all built very kind of modular in that we can now apply automated testing frameworks, and so every time that we make a change or add something to it, we can now run a suite of 1,000 automated unit tests to make sure that nothing broke or any previous issues that were fixed, no regression issues have come back. So it really now puts us in a good position to automate some of the quality control and just have that much more of a quality product that we're all used to. Okay, so that is what I wanted to talk about as far as the kind of architecture changes. And one of the last things that we'll talk about, and actually my time is doing pretty good here, is with Fusion8, we are coming out with a new offering. And what this offering is a hosted database. So prior to Fusion8, you always had to install your central database on a server. So you needed to buy a server or use it on one of your existing servers. But as we all know, servers, they need replacing every so often. The software needs upgrading. Databases need maintaining, all these sorts of things. And so what we're offering now is a new hosted central offering. And what this means is that we will host your central database. We will get the central running on a virtual machine. The platform we've used is the Azure cloud platform, but using a dedicated and secure VPN connection, you will have access to your central database. We will handle the configuration of the database. We're going to set up a set of standard maintenance plans, backups, database backups, the re-indexing, that sort of thing. And then we're going to, every day or whatever the frequency is for these database backups, we're then going to transfer them to a geo-redundant storage service. And what that means is that your database is going to be, your database backup is securely going to be replicated in a geo-redundant way. So if one of these data centers burns down, it's going to be available in another one. So any worst case scenario, this virtual machine is no longer available or crashes or gets corrupt, we can just fire up a new one right away, get SQL Server running, and restore this backup that we pulled from any one of these data centers that it's been replicated across. Price-wise, we're going to be releasing the pricing soon, but it is a kind of a pay-as-you, or it's like an annual subscription model. So you'll just pay, instead of an upfront cost and then a maintenance, it's just an annual, it's a subscription-based pricing. So you'll pay your subscription, and it'll just get you access to your central, and we'll take care of the infrastructure. We'll keep the VM updated, we'll keep SQL Server running and backups maintained, and that sort of thing. And we're also coming up with a bit of a staged package offer. So with your annual subscription, you'll get a certain amount of professional services, right? So the base package comes with so many days per year, and then you can increment the packages that each one comes with, a little more, a few more days. And these professional services can be used for training, for configuration, for reports, for scripts, whatever you want, whatever you would normally get one of our systems consultants or support guys doing would all be covered under these subscription services. So again, you'll see more information about this coming up on our website as far as kind of what the pricing structure of this looks like. But we've run through certain kind of pricing models, and they scale up to the point that you ultimately have a lower total cost of ownership by following this kind of model than if you were to run the local infrastructure on your own dime. So buy your own servers, buy your own software maintenance, upgrade every 5 years or so on, whatever the case might be. Okay, and that then pretty much covers what I wanted to show you about Fusion8. I think we're pretty much in time, which is good. And just one last little thing that I'll mention before we get to a few questions that have come up here is we are currently just working out some details, but we're going to be coming out with a Fusion8 upgrade promotion. And I'm not going to get into the details of what it actually is. You'll be getting an email soon over the next couple of weeks. But basically, for the first, for the first few clients that are going to be upgrading to Fusion8, we're going to be kind of sweetening the deal and throwing in something special. So keep an eye open for that. I know that for some people, when we send out these information emails, they get into junk folders and spam folders. So keep an eye on those folders, and you'll see this promotion coming across soon. Great.
All right. Thanks very much, Dave. With that, we'll begin the Q&A session. As mentioned earlier, if you have any questions for our presenter, please type it into the chat box on your screen. During the presentation, we received a handful of questions, so let's start off with those. So what data security is present for using web servers since the web service is not controlled by the company?
So the web server actually would be controlled by the company. So if you want to make use of this new option, if you want to make use of this new optional web service, it's going to come with it some new hardware requirements, right? So this means that you're going to need to find a server that can host this service, right? So something that can run IIS, and we're going to come up with a whole set of, recommended requirements, minimum requirements, that sort of thing. But this very much will be part of your IT infrastructure, and so it's all under your own current kind of security model. And then maybe looking into the hosted offering, because this will be available as part of that solution as well. Everything happens over a dedicated virtual network, so all of your communications to the web service in the hosted offering, everything is very much secured, through a dedicated virtual network that's yours and only yours, as a subscription-paying client.
Perfect. And what about, does the web server come as part of the standard upgrade, or is there an additional cost associated with it, or is it a different module, or how does that work?
No additional cost. This is just an extension of how Fusion Client works. So essentially how this gets implemented is it's a new, there's going to be a new field available to you that you can turn this on, and then you just have to specify, the path to the web service. And if it's been enabled, then it'll start using it. But if it hasn't been enabled, then Fusion Client will revert back to its default behavior. But keep in mind that the default behavior has also been completely rewritten. So even just that default behavior are faster. It's a performance increase.
Okay, and I have another question concerning what the color of the context of green and red, if they are both required fields. I don't know if you're able to, do you understand what I'm getting at there?
Yeah, so what if they are both? What if they are both context sensitive and required? That's a great question. To be honest, I'm not entirely sure, but I think what we did is we kind of said required was the most important. So I would have to check, and maybe we can follow up with that one. But I believe that the required would be a more of a priority. And then from that point, the kind of hovering over the column is going to tell you what the context driver is. So what column needs data before this column, before you can choose from this column.
Okay, well, thank you again, Dave, and everyone who joined us. We appreciate your time. I'll be following up with an email containing a link to this recording. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach me at teresabowers@datamindsoftware.com or by phone at 705-688-0101. That's it, everyone. Hope to see you again next week, and take care.
Thank you, everybody.